before we go any further with Nodebox, let's take a minute to chat a little bit about data, common data patterns, common data formats, and different things that you'll probably encounter, and maybe a thing or two about how to work with data and how to dig down and find useful things that you can work with. So this is a really good example of a publicly available data set. This is from Oregon.gov, and I did a little bit of digging around, and I'll definitely make sure that I provide this link to you. And what this is an example. This is a data set that provides all of the annual salary numbers for all the state employees. So it's out there. It's accessible from their website. They provide a very nice table view here that you can scan and organize and see different things with. I have it right now. I have it cascading by lowest salaries first, right? But this data set is actually available in a couple different formats. So one format that we see very primarily used out in the wild is JSON format. So I'm going to click on here, export, and it's actually going to give me all of these different formats. JSON is probably the most popular. I highly recommend it. We'll take a look at kind of what a snapshot of a JSON format is. Most of the popular APIs, which is it's just a fancy acronym for the back end of a website, where you can go in and scrape out all of just the data and all of the numbers and all of the stats. Most of them use JSON now. So Twitter and notably Instagram and Tumblr and some of these other websites, most of the APIs are done with JSON. So JSON is a popular format. It reads very well in JavaScript. That's why people use it. And I highly recommend it if you can get JSON. It's the best format to work with. But alternately, you still see CSV, which stands for comma separated values. I'm sorry, stands for comma separated values. And really what that is it's a format that's read pretty well in Excel, but also it reads very nicely into Nodebox as well. So I'll show you in a separate tutorial. I'll show you a little bit later how that reads in, and I'll also show you how JSON reads in. So one thing also to consider is that you can download single files of things, and you can export, or you can import those hard files into Nodebox and work with them. But also, one thing that we increasingly do a lot of is endpoints. So we work a lot with endpoints. So if I was to click on this, basically what it would do is, actually, I should back out of that. If I go to export, for example, here, and I say, if I click and I want to look at the API, what this does right here is this gives me an API access endpoint, right? And what this is this is a file with a JSON extension. And if I was to open up another window and kind of just dump that in there, chances are, let's see what we get. Yeah, I get all of that data that we were just looking at, but I get it in this JSON format, which is really, it's an array, but it has all these different column values here. So increasingly, to work with data, and especially to work with the freshest data, we're always pinging some sort of an endpoint, right? So something I do a lot of is I ping Instagram endpoints, and they return this JSON data to me, and then I just pull it directly and start working with it, or I might take it and store it and work with it offline. But increasingly, we work a lot with what we call an endpoint, which is basically a web address like this that we ping with any kind of a data visualization software, and it pulls the data instantaneously and brings in so that we can work with it. So we're actually going to model a workflow like that with Nodebox a little bit later on, and I'll show you how that's done. But I'll also show you a little bit later on how you can bring comma separated vertices, or I'm sorry, comma separated values into Nodebox to work with them directly. So let's go ahead and just kind of dive a little bit deeper into the way these data structures work. Again, we have endpoints that we can pull from the internet, but we also have offline files that we can download and work with as well. So for example, if I wanted to work with hang on here. If I wanted to work with the CSV file, I could certainly download that by clicking on it. And then what it does is it downloads it for me here, right? And then I can later on take that. It's a pretty big file, but I can take that and I can open that up in Nodebox and work directly with that data. So in a minute here, we're going to dive a little bit deeper and look at some of these data patterns and data structures. So here's another example of JSON. We looked at an example previously, but this one actually is specially kept inside of the browser so that it can show all of the nesting structures inside of JSON. And that's really one of the valuable things about JSON, is that you can nest lists of things inside of larger lists of things. If you don't quite get that concept yet, it's okay. But I'll maybe, I can demonstrate that here in just a minute and give you an idea of how that functions. So the nice part about this is what we call an API snapshot. I downloaded this from Instagram, so this is actually a pull that I did from Instagram. I looked up the tag selfie, and it gave me 20 results in JSON format. Now, it didn't send me the actual pictures, but you'll see it's very valuable. This is all some really valuable stuff in here. It gives me links to the images, right? So if I wanted to go and get the images, I could set up an algorithm to scrape those. But it also gives me things that are hard metrics that I might want to work with. So it gives me, for example, the username, the user ID. It gives me the time that was created. So this is very valuable in figuring out the sequencing of things if you want to position them by time. There should be likes in here somewhere. I definitely get an array of different tags that the post is tagged with. And let me see here. Location count. Okay, so this one here, it says count. I believe this is the this is comment count, right? Oh yeah, here you go, likes count. This one has 0 likes, so unfortunately they're not. Nobody has really liked them yet. But if you dig through the API enough, you'll find that there's definitely numbers here. So you could very easily take all these different data inputs here, and you could sort them by likes, for example. So the nice part about the JSON is that it really has this multi-tiered structure here. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of twirling these back to show you that you get this initial package, and it's really just one big JavaScript object. And you don't really need to know what a JavaScript object is per se, but it's a big, it sits inside of these big brackets, and it contains all of these different values. I get metadata, that's metadata related to my request, but I also get this thing here, this big package called data, and it has this big square bracket at the beginning, and it has all these objects inside. Each one of these objects is a single Instagram post that's been mined out. So I can go in here and I can roll these down independently and kind of see what they are independently. And one thing you will notice too is that there's arrays inside of arrays, or rather lists inside of lists, right? So these lists are nested inside of each other. And again, like I said, this is one of the reasons why we like JSON as a format, because it has this multi-levels of nesting. So I can see very easily, just this top level view, I can see I have information about the user, I have information about the likes, and these are all just different lists and arrays, right? So a really easy example of this is I have an item here called tags. So I can dig down into tags and I can see an array of tags, right? If I wanted to look at the different images, I could dig down into the array of images and look at different resolutions, right? And then each one of these formats is an array in and of itself, right? So low resolution is an array, right? It has the URL, it has the width, it has the height. So it can get pretty complex pretty quickly. So it's awfully nice to be able to look at it in a structure like this where you can nest things. This is really a luxury, being able to look at this in a snapshot like this. Normally you're dumping it into a text viewer and getting what you get out of it. But whenever you can look at something in this format in a web browser, it's really helpful. So this is one of the reasons why we use JSON, and these are comparable to, like, for example, attribution tags. These are called keys, but really they're comparable to maybe like what you may know as a column value, or like a data, like something that would be a description of what's contained in the data, right? So this is a column called attribution, this would be a column called tags, and then inside of that you have either lists, or accordingly you might have something like this, location. This person didn't log their location, so it says no, there's nothing in there, right? The filter, this is just a single value. It says, well, what's the filter? This person happened to use the filter early bird. So that's a little bit of an overview of JSON. Syntax-wise, it's separated with curly brackets, these squiggly brackets here, and it's also, the data is also in a list, it's separated with these big square brackets. So inside of square brackets, you'll find lists. Inside of curly brackets, you'll find what we call objects. So let's move a little bit forward, and we'll take a look at a couple of more formats. I won't spend as much time on the other formats, but it's, you know, it would be helpful to just familiarize yourself with a couple different data formats that we see out in the wild. So aside from JSON, we also talked a lot about comma separated values. So if you remember previously, I downloaded comma separated values from our salary database, right? So if you look at this, it should look fairly familiar. I went ahead and I called the database down. I made it a little bit easier to work with. I have this open in Notepad++. You can definitely use Text Wrangler for this as well, but it's very easy to open up your JSON files or your CSV files or your XML files or any kind of data file in Notepad++ to see kind of how the data is organized and structured. So you'll see, obviously, with comma separated values, the different columns, the different cells inside of each row that fall underneath of each column are separated with commas, right? So the classification, in this example, the classification, the service type, and then the salary, right, are separated by commas, and you know, so forth and so on. As we go down, down, you'll see that the pattern persists, right? So this is really the pattern that it's used to organize, and this is the pattern that's also used to parse it out in the different applications. So it's a very clearly communicated structure, and all of the applications know that when it sees a CSV file, it's going to have these certain, what we call delimiters, right? And it's going to work through them. This also here helps them denote what the columns are called. So this is also an extra special thing that they put in there. So each row is delimited or separated by a new line, right? So you have to press enter and you make a new line, and then you go ahead and you put in 3 more values or 4 more values, or however many values, separated by commas. So if we load this into Nodebox, which we'll do later, and we'll take a look at it, you'll see that it loads in rather nicely, and that it uses these to parse out all the different data and recognize what means what, right? So what data represents what other, you know, what relationship or what have you. So that's one very common format that we use. The only problem with this, though, is that you don't get that nested structure like we see in JSON. Right? So, you know, to review, we can stick objects inside of objects. We can also stick these lists of objects, or lists of values inside of objects. So you can get really robust with JSON, right? So I can take the comments objects and I can roll it out, right? So we talked about all that. With CSV, not so much. You know, we have it's a fairly straightforward column and row format, which you may only need that, but I don't know, maybe your data is so complex that maybe you do need JSON. So it's really up to you to figure out kind of which data format you're going to try to seek out to serve the best purposes for you. Another format too that actually, you know, views a lot like JSON, but is actually not like JSON. It's like what we call maybe a precursor to the JSON format and its popularity, is called XML. So this is used a lot less and less. We see it used out there in the real world, but a lot of blogs use XML, and also if you've ever heard of RSS, you'll see up in here. This is actually a feed from my blog. RSS format. So it's, you know, the terms can be interchangeable, XML and RSS. You know, there is a difference somewhat, but XML is the data pattern that RSS uses. And essentially what XML does is it takes certain tags that are named, these are like HTML tags or markup tags, right? And these markup tags enclose certain things. So here I've got something called a channel, and then inside of a channel I have items, which this should look fairly familiar, like we looked at with JSON. So the nice part about XML is that you can nest things, much like we did with JSON, right? So I have a channel. The channel contains sort of this metadata, right? The title of my blog, etc. But it also contains these items, right? So each individual post is an item. And then it has categories, and then so forth and so on. We can nest these infinitely to get lists of values, and also different objects and descriptions and all that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit like JSON in that respect. It's a little less descriptive, and you know it can be a little obtuse to work with, but it's still a solid format. You'll still see it used a lot in legacy systems, but it's you know, it's something that is out there, and you can certainly parse it to investigate and work towards your goal in your data project. So just something to be aware of there. There's also some things that you may not actually think of as data structures that can actually be really valuable and easy data structures that you can mine if you're really trying to dig deep for answers or data. So especially when it comes to data journalism, if things are a little bit tough to find, you'd actually be surprised that there are actually patterns out there that you can discover and dig through. So please consider HTML. A lot of you are probably already familiar with at least the concept of HTML, right? This is the language that is given to web browsers so that they can create the pretty pictures for us. Really, you know, I mean, that's really simplifying it, but you understand the concept that the web browser gets these tags, right? These markup tags, which is kind of like what we saw in XML, these markup language tags, and then it knows that this is a header, and that this is a table, and that this is a table body, and stuff like that. So HTML by design has to have a very hard structure. So it has to have a very organized and very hard structure, especially if it's well written. If it's poorly written, there's really not much we can help you with there, but I'd say 99% of the time it's pretty well written. HTML is pretty well written. So what we are looking at here, this is just an example I pulled from the UK Gov website of schools in the UK. And you'll see here that you know, it's a little messy, you know, just for like a straight data pool, but you're starting to see maybe a pattern here, right? So we have a table row, and then inside of a table row we have these different cells, right? So this is saying, for example, the name of the district, right, or the area where the schools are, and then it's giving you numbers for the amount of schools, right? So this is all really helpful. Oh yeah, okay, here you go. You've got your table headers for your primary school, secondary school, post-16 school, right? So here's the numbers that correspond to that. So this is actually a pattern or a data structure that you can mine like anything else. So especially when it comes to data journalism, you may get a situation where really stuff is just embedded inside of HTML, and you've got to dig a little bit deeper and parse that structure out. Also, just to get you thinking maybe a little bit on your toes, let's look at this. Is there a structure here? Well, I don't know. This is actually a Shakespeare play, right? But this is actually just plain text. Once you start really diving into data structures, you realize that pretty much anything is a data structure. So what are some of the patterns that we see here? I mean, this can be a bit challenging, but what are some of the indicators of patterns that we can see? Well, every time there's a scene, we see the word scene, right? So we can use that as a cue, or that as some kind of a clue as to what the pattern is. So every time we see scene, we can separate it out into a scene, right? There's also different ways that we end sentences, right? So if you start thinking about just our regular syntax and our grammar as a data structure, questions end with question marks, sentences end with periods. There's actually this very clear pattern of each person who speaks in the play is capitalized with a period at the end. That's certainly a structure that we can look for, a pattern that we can look for, and mine metrics about this. So I recently did some visualizations on some Shakespeare stuff, and I was looking for very challenging patterns like that to work out and start to find a little bit more interesting data about Shakespeare. So everything, for the most part, we have a syntax to everything. A lot of things that we do when written properly have a structure to them. So HTML has a structure, and also keep in mind that text has a structure. So Some of these are easier to parse directly in Nodebox than others. Some of them you will need to work with them. So feel free to use Notepad++, for example, to go in here and say, for example, I wanted to find, which we can go ahead and we can find things and replace them in Notepad++. So say, for example, I want to find all of the spaces and I want to replace them with commas, right, to create something maybe more like a comma separated values, right? So I can easily go in there and I can replace everything, which it, just went in and it replaced everything with commas. But sometimes you can go ahead and impose your own structures on this to make it easy to digest. So just keep that in mind as well. Even if you have to hack things up in Notepad++ or Text Wrangler, then it's certainly something that's at your disposal.